Shall I have to say, when I saw these series happening, I just wanted to give props to IOK for taking a positive stand in the Positive and Practical Parenting series. How many of you are parents? Okay. How many of you had parents or have parents? Okay, so everybody can relate to some extent. Like Sister Iman said, I was born and raised in Southern California, and can definitely identify with the challenge of being raised in an environment that was different from the ones that my parents were raised in. So there's a little bit of the adapting and a little bit of juggling, and so parenting, identity issues constantly come up, and we're constantly craving information on, okay, how can we be the best parents that we can be for our children, knowing that they're being raised also in environments that are different and times that are different, because there's a huge shift in world culture, right, with globalization. So I'm just going to give you a heads up. My style is very interactive, so definitely if you're here thinking that you're just going to get by listening and not participate, might not happen. But the more you engage and we participate, then the more relevant the information is to you, and then you kind of get to walk home with something, inshallah, that is more tailored for you and for your family and your friends and community. Okay. So I'm pretty sure the recording is not going to get your faces, so it's okay for you to participate. Nobody will call you out on that. But I want you to kind of just think back. I mean, if you want to close your eyes, you can. If you want to just sort of like touch base into a time in your childhood, like think back to how your parents did parenting for you. You don't have to share this part. This is just for you to connect with that. And what were some of the things that you really liked about how they did parenting, how they disciplined you, whether or not they were there to talk, how were rules set in the house, what would happen if things didn't go too well, and what are some things that you took away from that experience that you kind of like you relate to, like as a parent, it's like, oh, I would never ever do that with my children. Some of those things you might find that you are doing those exact same things with your children. You're like, oh no, I've turned into my mother or my father. And some of the things you said, you know what? I love how they did that, and I'm going to make sure that I'm going to do the same thing with my kids. So this is just kind of a personal reflection. But to keep that mindset when we're talking about different parenting styles today. A disclaimer from the beginning is that our parents, like whatever we learn today or whatever we're exposed to today, I truly believe they did the best that they could with what they knew. So even if we look at it and it's just like, oh no, that wasn't the best thing, they could have been better, they should have done better, but kind of gaining that empathy to what it was like for them to grow up and how do we learn parenting styles. So we know that most people tend to kind of parent the way that they were parented, and then some individuals go the other extreme and they're like, oh no, I absolutely hated what my parents did, and they go the extreme opposite. And we know that extremes in general are not where we're looking to be. So with that, bless our parents, may Allah reward them and forgive their shortcomings and empower us to be the best that we can be, so that one day our kids turn back and they're kind of like, our parents did the best that they could with what they knew and what they had at the time. So inshallah. So just kind of a little flavor before we start. I do have handouts, so we can kind of pass these out if I can get some volunteers to just pass one out. You're welcome to take notes. You're welcome to not look at them and just participate the whole time and know that most of the information will be going home with you. So you can review those later as well. What they do know, so what research shows is they've been studying parenting for like over 50 years, and they tend to look at, in psychology, when they look at, okay, what determines behavior? Is it based on genetics or is it based on environment? And a lot of times they're kind of like, you have people that argue and say, no, you have a genetic predisposition and that's what determines your style and your temperament, which also impacts your parenting style. Or they look at it and they say, no, it's the environment. It doesn't matter what your genetic predisposition is. The environment you're raised in is absolutely what determines the outcome. So what do you think they found? Someone said both. Okay, so yes, both. What percent? Okay, so like throw out a number. Okay, so like 70-30. Any other guesses? 50-50? So like 20 genetics, 80 nurture. Okay. 30 genetics, 70. Okay. So what they tend to find is it is pretty close to 50-50, sometimes 49% nature, so genetic, and 51% environment. So there's maybe skewed a little bit more to environment, because if we think about it, can people change? People have different views on this. Sometimes they're like, no, you are what you are and that's it, and very rigid. But in general, people can change. So we like to think that environment, genetics play a role, and they create a predisposition, but there's also a part where if a person is willing to kind of explore new ways of being and new ways of behavior, they can learn new behavior and make changes. So with that, we know that it's environment plays a role. So when they look at parenting, they measure 2 dimensions. They say, okay, how many parenting styles are there? And you'll probably hear this a lot, and as you can kind of tell from the flyer, for those of you who saw it, how many are we talking about today? 4. Okay, so it would make sense for us to make sort of a quadrant. So they measure 2 things. They measure demandingness, okay? So if we put this, so this would be high level of demandingness up here, and this would be low level of demandingness. And when we say demandingness, we're talking about the extent that parents control their child's behavior, okay? And then on this spectrum, we're going to put responsiveness. So this would be, over here would be high responsiveness. Okay, and this one, it's the degree that parents are accepting and sensitive to their children's emotional and developmental needs. Okay, so this gives us 4 quadrants, right? So if we have someone who is high on demandingness, meaning there's a lot of control of their child's behavior, and they are low on responsiveness. So they're not really in tune with what the child needs. Okay, some of you are nodding your heads. You're like, yeah, that sounds familiar. Either we've seen people do that, or we may have experienced it ourselves. But this quadrant will be the authoritarian. What do you think some qualities of those are? I know you have them in your packet, but we'll try to make this the interactive piece. So what does it sound like that would be? Very strict. Okay. Controlling. Oh, so speak louder. And I'll repeat what they're saying so that way, okay. Not listening, so not listening to their children. Okay, what else? Yelling, so maybe a lot of reprimanding them, or just kind of a loud environment if they're not following the rules. What else? Not willing to negotiate. So their say, it's sort of like the parents have the final say and the only say. Okay. Anything else? Threats. So the child might be threatened if they don't follow the rules or behave a certain way. Yes, you're all right. So that would fall under the authoritarian parenting style. And as a result of that, how do you think a child would grow up? What feelings would the child have in that environment? Rebellious, okay? Anger, resentment, aggressive. So disrespectful. So what they find here with the authoritarian, it's always, when we do these kinds of talks or these like studies, it's always like it depends, right? There's generalizations, and then there's always like the it depends piece. So they'll find that children of authoritarian parents, depending on the culture that the environment is, right? So sometimes in very strict environments, if the whole entire culture over there is strict, it works well. But when we're looking at an environment where there's so many different styles, and this is not the norm, it's not supported by a lot of policies outside, right? I mean, then things change. So here, the children grow up, they're afraid to speak up. They're afraid to kind of make a mistake, because if they make that mistake, what happens? Or if they don't follow the rules, they're going to be punished. These are the children that are more likely when their parents or authority is not present, they're the ones that are going to act out. So they kind of, because kids are pretty smart, right? Like they'll learn ways around the system. So if I know that one parent is going, is going to hit me, or, maybe hit me lightly or punish me, take away my privileges if they see me doing something, then even if I want to do that something, I'm not going to do it when they're there, because I know better, right? I'm going to get in trouble. So they get very creative in ways of acting out. But what's their sense of self? Do they feel that they matter? They feel unimportant because they have no say, right? It doesn't matter what they think. It doesn't matter what they feel. It's whatever mom and dad say are the rules. That's it. There's no exceptions. It's just a very rigid environment. Okay. Yes, so perfect. So you're going to take us to the next. Okay, so let's address that. So you're saying that we're kind of highlighting the negatives a little bit to the extreme, but there's also some positives to this personality style, or parenting style. Speak more to that. Tell me more.
Following the rules. This is the way since he had a child, very little.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if there are clear rules that are set, then the child may know to follow rules. They have a better understanding that rules are to be followed. Okay, so that's kind of segueing us. So for this one, the key point, it's not the control part that we're disturbed by. It's the low responsiveness. So even if I am a parent and I know what's right, and I'm telling my child what to do, and they want to just kind of maybe negotiate. There's no negotiation. It's not what the kid needs. It's going to shift us right here. So you're taking us to the next quadrant. I love it. It's perfect. So now we have high demandingness and we have high responsiveness. Okay? So yes, there's high expectations. So what does that sound like when there's high demandingness and high responsiveness? And responsiveness means they're paying attention to the children's developmental needs, and they're paying attention to their feelings as well. So what might that look like? Okay, more positive. How so? Okay, so the parent is saying that they're making it clear what their expectations are for the child, and they're responsive to the child's needs. So is there a little bit of leniency here if there is, maybe there is an exception, or they want to negotiate? Is there room for negotiation here? Okay, so this one is called authoritative. So it still has that authority piece, but this one isn't authoritarian. So they're more of the police officer. They're the judge. They're there to basically say, you didn't follow the rules, you're going to get punished. No buts about it. Right? It's the police officer almost waiting, like, oh, something messed up. Okay, we have to act now and basically punish them immediately. We need to set that tone for them. The authoritative, they're still the authority. So they still have high expectations for their kids. They still demand certain rules to be followed, but there's responsiveness. They're warm with their children. They listen to their children. And we'll do some examples so that you can also maybe form little groups and discuss and just kind of see how, maybe if you share what are some current challenges that either you're seeing with your kids or you're seeing your friends have with their kids or you're experiencing maybe like in the school environment, you can share those and then we'll kind of tackle them together. Okay, so authoritative, what do those children look like? Okay, so they're happier, there's room for negotiation, appreciated, so they feel valued. Okay. Secure. They know, so the expectations are clear of them, and they know that there might be, so for these parents, a lot of times there's certain routines and there's certain expectations in the household. And the children are aware of what those are. It's not sort of like a surprise, well, mom just feels like doing things this way today, and then, today we can sleep at 8 o'clock, tomorrow we can sleep at 10. They're not really, no, there's a clear bedtime. Maybe bedtime is 9 o'clock, you're in your bed, and there's a routine that leads up to it, so the children know it. But what happens here, if let's say, for example, there's a certain, let's say they're in middle school, and they still have a bedtime, and a show is coming on at a time after, or maybe there's like an important documentary that might be on, and they want to see it, and they might get extra credit at school. What would happen here? Bedtime is bedtime. Like, that's it. We're not even discussing it. What's happening here? Okay, so the bedtime is 9 o'clock, and the show starts at 8:30. The documentary is going to go till 9:30, so there's 30 minutes there. So because it's important, and there's discussion. There's a give and take with the child. So that leaves the child to feel valued, appreciated, that there isn't, are they afraid to talk to their parents? There's an open line of communication. Okay. Low demandingness. So no expectations. Okay, not trying to control their children's behavior. Low demandingness, high responsiveness. Puts the children in control as opposed to the parents. So this parenting style is the permissive parenting style. They're very in tune with their children's needs. Okay? Yes.
I have a question and a comment. So, of course, we are talking about these styles, but in parenting, it's not a single person, right? And both can have different styles.
Yes.
Maybe when we are talking, we should talk about that also, because if one person is authoritative, another person is very lenient, and so maybe it's somehow we have to deal with two people in each partner.
The dynamic. Okay, so let's go. Only one style, the father. Okay, so we'll look at them. So that's a wonderful point, right? The point was made that there are two people often involved in parenting of the children, right? We're looking at like the mother and the father. So there's a dynamic. So what happens if they have different styles? How common is that they have different styles? Very common. Very common. Okay, so we'll get to that dynamic. We'll go through what these are because we'll identify with ourselves first. And this is important. A lot of times when we already have kids, it becomes more of like we already have kids, sort of. We didn't realize that this was the other person's parenting style. So a lot of times when we're doing premarital counseling, this is a huge piece that comes into it. Not to say that there's one that's better than or than the other. Studies will show that there's some that are more effective and beneficial to the children, but it's important for the parents to be on the same page and understand. So we will get to that point. Thank you. That's very true. So permissive style. Someone said the child is in control. So they're very responsive to their children's needs. Child doesn't want to go to school today. They're having a tantrum. Oh, it's okay. I don't want them to be traumatized by the school experience. No, maybe they're not ready yet. It's okay. We'll keep them here. Okay? What else? The child, you're shopping, you're grocery shopping, and they're picking up on certain things. They saw that box of cookies that they just have to have, and they're throwing a tantrum, and then what happens? Oh, I don't want them to cry. Oh, they have been such a good kid. Okay, so they're giving in a lot. Yeah, or let's keep it quiet in the store, right? I want to pick my battles. I don't want a scene. I don't want people looking at me. Especially sometimes it's like we already have enough, people looking at us to begin with walking around, so let's not add one more layer to it. Yes?
I've seen this. A lot of people do that. They think mother's working, father's working. This is what we do to substitute what they
Yes. So a lot.
friends in the weekend do whatever you want because the whole week you didn't see me, you didn't see the mother. So this is the price.
That's a Very good point. So a lot of parents sometimes will look at it if mom is working and dad is working the entire week, so it's weekend comes around and it's more of, let's just spoil them and give them things because we're not able to give our time. So then let's substitute it with material things and just make sure that they're always happy and they're never upset. But what happens with children when that's what we do? We think that they love it in the moment. They love it in the moment, but what we know is that children need structure. They need structure for healthy development, and they're constantly, even though, okay, so this is the cool thing. And I'd look at it because I used to be a teacher before I went into counseling, and you can kind of argue that once a teacher, always a teacher, right? But we would see it with the children that, especially the younger grades, they're constantly pushing limits. Somehow, and it's sort of, it doesn't make sense because you're like, well, why are you pushing? I mean, if you really want the limit, why are you pushing it? But there's something that makes them feel comfortable and secure knowing that there are boundaries. Because it's kind of like saying there's someone there who's taking care of me, right? Even though they'll throw the tantrum because they want to see how far they can go, but in the long run, it helps them know that someone is there who's watching out for me, who cares for me, who's caring for my safety and my well-being, even though they don't have the words to actually say that or express it, but that's a lot of times what the feeling is. So we tend to see this huge culture sometimes of like overcompensating because we're not giving the children time. Let's give them material, let's give them material things, not say no to them. We don't want them to be upset. So do they grow up kind of spoiled? A little bit more, very. I see faces going, not just kind of, very. There are no rules sometimes, right? They make the rules as they want them.
I want to say maybe they'd be more sensitive to rejection because they never really heard no or when they can't get something.
So sensitive to rejection because they're not used to hearing no. So when someone tells them no later on in life, it's kind of like, whoa, like. It's a very good point. And so that's what they see is they have a harder time regulating their emotions, right? So if they're upset at something, it's a lot of times like through childhood, through certain limits that we set and through boundaries that are set, they kind of learn like, maybe I wanted the toy. If I'm always given the toy, it's kind of like, well, when someone says no to me, I'm going to throw a tantrum because tantrums are what always worked. Versus knowing that like, okay, I see that you really want the toy. A big part of parenting is going to come from validating their feelings. And that's where the responsiveness comes, is we want to be able to acknowledge. Because here, if a child sometimes is like upset or sad or crying, it's like, you have nothing to be sad about. What are you sad about? Like, no, it's just no is no. Like, that's it, end of story. And kind of like deal with it, right?
Saying that, get used to this.
Get used to it. Yeah.
They raise it this way, they get used to it.
And if children are raised over here, so they're used to the rules here. They're used to kind of not speaking up. Here, they're used to no rules. So these are kind of opposites. They'll take advantage, and it's not necessarily with the intention of taking advantage because they didn't know anything else. Like they always got their way. So they're kind of running the show.
And also they would have a hard time later on adjusting to rules and other type of things in society because when they grow up, they have to work with other people.
Yes.
Now it's not their parents that they can do whatever they can say whatever.
So they have a harder time adjusting to society, social norms, when they have to work with other people and there are rules. It's a much more difficult adjustment that happens. Yes.
I've seen, for example, some kids, no rules at home, take whatever. When they go spend a day with other family,
Ah.
and the parents, I've seen it. They enjoy the rules, but the father, mother don't eat in the family room. They follow the rules. And at home, they don't follow the rules. And the other kids, they are sick of the rules, but he's happy because he's missing.
So so what you're saying is that sometimes children, when they're raised with permissive parenting style, if they go visit other families where they have certain rules and structure, they follow them and they enjoy that because they kind of know what to expect and what's coming next.
Sometimes they feel it.
And they miss it. They wish they had that structure.
Sometimes these kind of kids put their rules on their parents.
So they put their rules on their parents because they know the parents are going to give in.
For myself with this family.
Yes.
The family will follow his rules.
The family will cater because they don't want to tell the child no.
There's no rules in the permissive.
Yeah.
Like this, I'm a grandmother. I saw any kind.
And
As a psychologist.
yes, yes. So you've seen a lot being a grandmother and a psychologist, of course.
Also, the kids, I think, both authoritarian and permissive, like, they have a lot of anxiety issues. They deal with a lot of anxiety, and they themselves don't know what to expect. Because, I mean, it's difficult for them to set rules in life,
Mhm.
what to expect in life, because they have not been, like, trained like
Yes, so the point that you mention is authoritarian and permissive parenting styles. The children in both of those styles don't know what to expect. Well,
later in life.
so here they might know what to expect because they know that there are rules and they have to be rule followers in order to do well. Here there's no structure.
I mean, like in the authoritarian now, they don't know when it is their time to set up goals because they have been so all the time being the puppet.
Okay.
Do this and do that.
So their sense of identity and what matters to them and developing their own goals and their own identity, it's sort of like, well, I'm supposed to just be whatever they told me to be. Okay.
To expand on that point, it might be an issue of low self-esteem as authoritarian.
Definitely lower self-esteem than here. And over here also, they're more egocentric. So that self-esteem part, it's not as it's not as low as here, but they feel very entitled, right? What I want, I get, because that's just how it goes.
So we spoke about a lot of negative characteristics. So my question is, does this somehow promote experimentation, confidence, those type of things? Because they are doing a lot of things their own.
So does it promote sort of that sense of autonomy or the sense of they're going to go out there and they're going to experiment and explore new things? Yes, they're more likely here to go out and explore things than they are here. I'm going to get to the fourth one real quick, and then we'll kind of tie things together and see how it actually like plays out when we have that dynamic. This quadrant, I don't think, well, I'm 1,000,000% sure nobody here is even remotely in this quadrant because you wouldn't be here if you were low demandingness and low responsiveness. So here there's no expectations. They're not trying to control their children's behavior, and they're not in tune with their child's needs. So it doesn't sound very attached, right? So this one is referred to as neglectful. Sometimes also referred to as rejecting. Okay, and for this one, I don't know if you might have seen in your children's schools perhaps that there's kids that the parents are just frequently gone. They're not really involved. Maybe the teachers have never seen the parents show up to any of the meetings. The children might be expected to go home and stay by themselves. Okay, so there's no expectation and there's no in-tuneness with the child's feelings. These are higher risk for in teenage years for suicide and some mental health issues, and they're also at higher risk to try to join something that has structure. And what usually has structure? Gangs. Okay, there's a sense of family. And so when they do research on that too, they're looking at a lot of times like gangs actually, there's a whole culture and there's a reason. So we look at it as like, oh, it's something very bad, and okay, it can be destructive in a certain way, but when we are able to gain a little bit of appreciation of what role it fills and why teenagers or children might be inclined to kind of, get attracted to that or join it, is it gives them, there's a lot of times there's a family structure, there's a sense of authority, there's a hierarchy, there's, people do things, there's a loyalty, they know they have each other's backs, and they support each other every step of the way. Sometimes in a destructive manner, but that need for belonging is there, and that's something that they miss when the parents aren't even in the picture. A lot of times, parents who adopt this style, they themselves are experiencing mental health problems. So there could be depression, like severe clinical depression that could be taking place where it's making it hard for them to kind of bond or attach or sort of even think of someone else. And sometimes they themselves have also experienced child abuse or neglect as children when they were growing up. So again, it kind of caters to the whole, they're doing what they knew, so if this is how we grew up, then that just must be what the normal thing is with that. So we kind of, someone had mentioned that we're talking about all of like sort of like the negative pieces, but what are some things, so I kind of want to drift us back over here, because if you couldn't tell by now, which one are we sort of aiming towards? Authoritative, okay? This is the one that we're trying to emulate. Are we gonna be here 100% of the time? We're human, and like obviously some of the stuff we're used to, or when we're under stress or pressure, even if we're sitting here, we're training ourselves to be a certain way, you bring in stress and pressure and like things that start happening, and we kind of resort to just what we're used to. And sometimes what we're used to is just not now, no because I said so. We don't have like because I said so. Because we might not have the ability at that moment to sit there and actually discuss and talk and see, to see the whole picture of what's really going on. Okay, so authoritative, we want to have high demandingness. So yes, we have structure, we have rules, there's routines that the children are used to. It's very important between the parents to agree on how they're going to parent their children. They're not always going to be on the same page. But if you walk away with nothing today other than this one little piece, it's even if there are differences between both parents as they're parenting, it's never expressed in front of the children. So that is discussed behind closed doors. And even if it's sometimes one parent might be reacting in a certain way, and the other parent is like, oh my goodness, I mean, unless there's obviously like harm to the child, that's a different story. But in general, if it's just like the child wants to do something, one parent said no, and the other parent thinks they should be able to do it. Are we going to stand there and argue and be like, well, why are you telling him no? It's really good for him to go and he'll learn and he'll be able to see his friends. Well, no, I want him home today at this time. But, I mean, all of his friends are going to be there, and the child is sitting right there. What do you think happens? Torn. And what message are they getting? Okay, so now they're learning that, wait a minute, mom and dad can't even decide on one thing. And then who do I know to go to when I need something? Okay, and they learn to start manipulating, and I know a lot of times like the word manipulate has a very negative, we hear it very negatively. However, if we look at it just functionally, it serves a purpose, right? They start to learn behaviors to get what they want. Kind of genius, smart. So let's have them learn to do behaviors to get what they want that are beneficial to them. Okay, so it's important for the parents to be on the same page. It's important for the parents to have time to discuss the children's issues. Maybe after the kids go to sleep, there's time set aside, maybe on a weekly basis, where they're sort of, talking about what are we going to do? What's our disciplining style going to be? And there's like classes, and I can give you resources for that as well. But it's going to look different for every family dynamic. And so it's not the cookie cutter, it's, one size fits all. But looking at your dynamic in your family. And obviously it varies with age. So some people have multiple age groups in the home, right? They might have a child who's 4 and a child who's 8 and a child who's 12 and someone who's like 18. And you're dealing with, talk about now you're bringing 2 parents into the picture, but now you're dealing with developmental stages that are different, right? So it kind of adds, well, what's okay for one is developmentally inappropriate for the other, because we're not going to all have the same bedtime, right? The 4-year-old needs a different amount of sleep than the 18-year-old. And the 18-year-old, we might not be able to really enforce all of that with them. We really need, their buy-in a little bit more. And we trust that if we've given them the tools and we've modeled, this one's really big on modeling and trusting them to make the right decision. So the boundaries are clear, the expectations are clear, there's open communication, and we trust that they're going to make the right decision. Because that trust that the children feel when they're growing up, if they feel like mom and dad are, they have my back, or they know that I'm going to do well, I'm going to make the right decision, they have a certain level of confidence to then go about their world, and then they have that sense of autonomy. They can go out and engage in different projects, and you kind of know that you've planted that seed of I trust you, versus like, well, they don't believe me anyways, nothing I say goes, so who cares, I'm just going to do my own thing and nothing ever matters anyways. They're never going to believe me. So, questions? Kind of just like pausing because. So what are some things that that you hear or that you face or that you're wondering, like, how do we do this? What does this look like? Anyone have any sinner? Yes.
I'm definitely trying to navigate the thing we mentioned about compensating for like not spending time with the child, or if the child's going through a difficult time in life, maybe a health challenge or another family challenge, and parents or other caretakers like grandparents trying to overcompensate for that. For me, it's kind of abstract, and I'd love to know how that looks and some other practical ways.
Okay, so the question is sort of like if the child maybe has a certain health condition, there's more people who are on board who are kind of giving in to trying to compensate for maybe parents not being around as much.
Or just another family challenge, lifestyle challenge. Like let's say a child living with divorced parents, so there's single parent households.
Very common. And so then what happens, sometimes it becomes more of, well, they get to do this when they're at their dad's house, but then when they're at their mom's house, the rules are a little bit different, and dad gets them on the weekends where it's all fun and games, and mom has them during the week where she has to basically be the one who's taking them, or vice versa, or even within the same family where there's certain expectations. Right? So dad might have to wake up early to get to work. Mom maybe works a little bit later, so she's the one who's taking him to school. So the idea when they do the research on this, it's not the amount of time or it's not the things that we buy like for the kids in terms of the compensating it. There's a huge part of it where it's the quality. So if we do make it a point, there are things that are set in, like there's scheduling of the time that's going to be spent together, and it's making sure the quality of that time is together. Because you'll see a lot of times, and I've seen this, like I'll go places and it's like, oh, we're having a family dinner, and the family's sitting there and everybody's like on their phone. You're kind of like, okay, if this is the only time you get together as like a family, everybody's on their phone, like where yes, they're all physically sitting in the same space, but are they energetically on the same wavelength? They're not. One person is posting, and they might even be talking to each other on Facebook, or like WhatsApp. It's like, oh, group text everyone, family's doing this, what do you want, pass the salt, I don't know. I mean, they joke about that, but that's happening a lot too. So it's also looking at the time of screen time. Right? They'll do studies on that. A lot of times parents, if they're busy, it's kind of like, okay, well, we'll just give the kid the iPad and they're watching they're watching Dora, or they're watching educational programs, or they're playing a good, an educational game, but where's that interaction? So we're social beings, right? Like we are the only organism, I think, we're the only creation that actually needs that bonding. Like for brain development, like we need that connection. Other animals, they need that for survival. However, it's like just for the survival. But they're really big on, it's just their instinct. Like they need to eat, they're going to find a way to eat. But human beings, like for our brain development to be healthy, we need that interpersonal connectedness. And so that's why the worst thing they can do for people in prison, especially when they're like on life sentences, the most extreme form of punishment is what? Isolation, solitary confinement. It will drive them off the wall. They like at a certain point, and I think there's a push right now to not allow for that. Don't quote me on it, but I think I heard it. But yeah, so when we look at that, and then we look at the time with our children, it's like, okay, we're all there. How can we be more engaged? So what does this look like on a typical day? And we'll look at it from different perspectives. So you have two parents that are working. That's a lot of stress, right? And they have children. And there's maybe different children. And those children, they're coordinating schedules, they're coordinating them, making sure they get their homework done, making sure they get fed, making sure if they have extracurriculars that they're able to do those, making sure that they are with their bedtime routine, and that they're getting to bed at a time so they can wake up and function and be able to go to school and pay attention and concentrate. So what does the time with them look like here? It might be much less, right? But what can we do in the time that we have with them? So talking, I know people are like, well, duh, you just kind of, ask them. So we can ask them how their day went. But then it also becomes a certain layer of, okay, can we ask questions that brings out more? Because sometimes we'll ask yes or no questions. Did you have a good day today? Yeah. Anything happen at school? No. You have any homework? No, I finished it. And it's kind of like, well, I talked to them, I checked in with them, versus how was your day today? What happened at school? Did anything exciting happen? And that we engage them in that process where they start to feel, it's teaching them to kind of like recap. It's giving them a message that I care. It's not just, okay, like we're just checking in and then we're just going to move on to the next thing. And if I answer them quickly and get them off my case, then I can just go and do my own thing. So I'll go read or go on the computer and just, watch TV or whatever. Yes.
One of the things we can get, because we are talking about our expectation as a parent, less concerned about their expectation. So most of the time, if kids are being raised by different family members, they become confused. And then wherever they get some attention, they go towards that side, maybe internet or other family members. And sometimes it results in abuse as well. So we can have even a small amount of time, a common activity, whether it's playing cards, watching movie or whatever. That can also let them feel us as a parents as well as friends.
Mm-hmm.
And with friends, they can be both expressive. So rather than you said yes or no question, that's kind of one of the things we can do.
So an added thing is so you're basically saying spending quality time and playing, coming down. Yeah. So a lot of times, and I know growing up myself, we would always hear, a lot of the lectures or the talks would be around, the children have to be respectful to the parents, and the children have to, don't even say off to them, and it's always, the children have to be a certain way to the parents. And more recently now we're looking at it and we're saying, okay, what about the parents? What are the duties of the parents towards their children? And so a big part of it is, okay, it has to kind of, it's a give and take. So sometimes this parenting style will stand with, I'm the parent, like you obey Allah and then you follow, you be kind and respectful to your parents. And it's sort of like, it's just a blanket, they get to do whatever they want, which is not how it's supposed to be, right? We need to come down to the level of the child and connect and bond, because someone was giving a khutbah yesterday and they said, what you plant, they were actually talking about that. They were talking about how, what the parents kind of owe their children when they're growing up. And so he was saying, it's important to see what are you planting? So you can't come and plant a cactus and expect to find, to bear apples. You're not going to get apples from a cactus plant, right? But if you plant apple seeds, you'll get an apple. And so the idea is, are we planting kindness and compassion in our children, or are we just expecting them to have it, but we've never really connected and bonded with them to begin with? And so what we're doing at those small, and it's a lot, and it's a lot of pressure. And are we going to mess up sometimes? Absolutely. But it's important to know that kids are learning from us. Like, we are emulating what they can be. So when we mess up and we own it, and we actually have a talk with them, and we show them that we can assume responsibility for our mistake, we're teaching them it's okay to make a mistake. However, you make a mistake, you assume the consequences that come with it. And if you've wronged someone, you apologize. So sometimes parents have an idea that I can't apologize to my child. Like, even if it was wrong, it's like, no, because then they're going to get too used to it and they're going to think I'm weak and they're going to think they can get away with whatever. And that's not the case, right? We're human, they're human. So are we raising them to live in a world where everything is perfect in a bubble? Or are we raising them to live that, they're going to make mistakes. It's part of life. And we make it too, and life goes on. But we address it, and we talk about it. And we see where the boundaries are. So a lot of times, for example, let's say a child they were playing somewhere, maybe we were over at a friend's house, and the child is playing with another child, and they went over and they kind of snatched the toy and they hit the kid. So we're talking about younger kids at this point. What do we do with our child? Some parents will turn around and be like, oh my goodness, do not hit that child. And they'll go and they'll hit the child. So it's like, wait a minute, you're telling him not to hit the kid, but then you're hitting them. Like, mixed, very confusing, very confusing. Okay, versus, or some of them will go and snatch that toy out of their child's hand and give it back. You do not take things from other people. What have I just done to that child too? I just took something from them. So what I'm saying and what I'm doing are not matching, and we think it's clear because we're going for justice and we want the other child to feel, to not feel bad, but then we're not communicating that. Versus, it's not okay to take things from, it's not okay to just take things from other people. Okay? So, and we have them in a way, sometimes it's talking and sometimes we will have to take it away, but there's a difference of just going over and snatching it out of their hand versus having a conversation around it, right? So if we go down to their level, and that's another thing, I'm sure all of you do this, but when we are talking to kids, depending on where they're at, very simple thing, but if we kind of like, if they're up to here, if we just go and make it a point to be at eye level. Because it can be scary, like if you're talking to someone and we're kind of like giants to like little kids, right? Even if we're like normal sized people. It's very intimidating. And especially if you have someone so much bigger than you and they're kind of like reprimanding you or kind of telling you that you did something wrong, it makes it even scarier. So if we go down to that level and we connect with it, and we help them name their feeling. What are you feeling right now? I can tell you really wanted to play with that toy, clearly because they took the toy from the other kid. Okay? So I can tell you really wanted to play with that toy, but so-and-so was playing with it. And sometimes it's like, do you like it if we know that there's an example where someone else do you like it when your brother or your sister comes and takes your stuff? So there's a little bit of talking, a little bit of patience on our part too with them. Because sometimes we're kind of like, oh no, we need to fix this like in a split second, and they have to know it's not okay. But if they know it's not okay, but they've also felt like, I can still reprimand them in a way, but still be warm with them. So it's that kind but firm. So they know that they're cared for and there's consequences. And I have to enforce the consequences. Because that's part of the expectations and that's part of where we let them know that there are, like, that's the structure in their life. So it's yes, I love you, and you're not going to be able to play with that toy for the rest of the night. And I love you, and I'm at your level, and I might even give him a hug, and I understand this is really difficult for you. I can tell you're really upset, you're really sad, and you're still not going to get your toy. Right? Because if I'm like, oh, I understand you're really upset, don't cry, okay, here's your toy, then what happened? I lost it. That's it. I just taught them that crying is going to give them what they want, and where's the idea of consequences for behavior? They don't have it. Someone had a hand up. Thank you. Yes. So we're instilling in them the skills. We're teaching them not just to get by for the next hour or two or a day or two. We're teaching them kind of how the world is structured outside and the skills that they're going to be able to take with them throughout their life. Thank you. Yes.
I think going back to the authoritative scenario where you don't have time with your kids, like what do? I think it's also important not just to ask them questions, but to like let them know you're listening, so like your body language.
Yes.
Your body language too, like look them in the eye. There's
Okay.
parents where you might ask them questions, but then they're like doing some task or they're not really paying attention.
Or they're on their phone.
Yeah, exactly. That could be like
That's an awesome point.
kids. They're trying to tell you things and you're not even looking at them.
Okay, so with asking questions and getting them engaged, so part of the engagement, like you said, is really having that the open body position, showing that we're attentive to them. Because I can ask a question and be like, so, tell me about your day today. And then here I am, I'm just sort of, oh, really? Okay, that was good. Okay, yeah. Let me just put the thing on the stove and cook. And it could be that we're washing dishes and we have a lot of things to do, but then maybe that's not the time that we ask them, because we do want to give them the message that I'm here, I care, and I'm listening, I'm attentive, you matter. You matter enough to me for me to pick a time for us to talk where I can actually be present with you. Because if we have such little time with them, it's not fair to them for us to just give them like scraps of our time. Yes.
Just to add to that, a quick reflection, the Prophet ﷺ speak with them to face them, with his whole body, like not like just turn his face or over his shoulders or behind him, but he would face them attentively and listen, be fully present.
That the Prophet, so the example of the Prophet ﷺ, when somebody would speak to him, his entire body would be facing the person, not just the face, and giving the message of being present with them. And that's something a lot of times people are like, well, I'm listening, yeah, I'm paying attention, and it's sort of like, no, you're not.
The other thing I had in mind when we were talking about asking your kid what happened today when you do at school, one idea I heard, instead of asking them questions, is to just start volunteering what you did that day and talk about, oh my God, I did this, and then guess what happened here, and then just go on, and then they just can't help it but to explode with what they have in their heads and what they experience. Well, Mom, I did this.
That can work. That can work. Depending, it's going to depend on the relationship, the dynamic. So if they're not used to that at all, like if there isn't that dynamic of that healthy exchange between them, and then parent comes and starts to talk, it might be like, okay, well they're talking, so then I don't have to. So that's cool. Or it could be more of like, wait, we're in this excited moment where we're used to sharing what we've done together, and they feel like they get to hear, some of the cool things, and they get to share it, and we, highlight and support them in the, the positive things that they're doing, and we listen to them, where we create an open environment for them to talk about even things that might have gone bad or gone wrong. So a lot of times too, it's all the modeling piece, and the more we are able to kind of own, and we want to also be appropriate in the types of things or mistakes that we share with them. Most of the time it might be that, you know what, you came to talk to me today and I was a little bit distracted, and I know that I was distracted, and I don't think that made you feel very good. So I'm sorry about that, and that's it. But I really do want to hear what you had going on. So do you think we can maybe spend a few minutes right now where it can be just you and me, and you can tell me all about your day? Then it's like, oh, okay. So I let them know I messed up, and I fixed it. Or I tried to fix it. They might be like, no, I don't want to talk about it right now. Like, no, it's okay, I understand. And subhanAllah, kids are so forgiving. Like sometimes we treat kids like adults, and we think that they hold grudges, but like children, it's their fitra, it's their instinct. It's just like, okay. And they live in the moment, and it's more about the moment right now. And then it's like, if you they might not even remember, but it's more like, hey, let's just go and play right now, for the most part, right? In that healthy environment, that's what they're like. And so if we kind of remember that, and just remember like how accepting like children are, like a lot of times we're the ones that teach them not to be accepting of things. Because we get really rigid with it, or we're not accepting of ourselves. So the more accepting of ourselves we can be, we let them know that what they're doing, we want them to keep that beautiful nature that they have. You had your hand up. Yes.
Right. I think we are discussing about mentally stable patients. We should also ask about ourselves, where as a parent, where we are standing in terms of self-esteem, how we were raised, if there abuse, or if I might have some mental disorder. Because when I do my volunteer work in masjid, or mostly they complain about the kids.
Mm-hmm.
But when I talk about it to them, it's more like the parents have either anxiety disorder or bipolar depression. So we should also ask ourselves that our behavior is rationalized or not. Because if not, we have to seek help from the counselor.
Yes.
Otherwise, we will keep thinking that I am a parent and I'm always right.
So you bring up a good point too, is we're talking, a lot of this stuff we're talking about, it could be with parents that are not having any mental health issues, or maybe their self-esteem, they're kind of grounded, they're confident, and they have a solid stance in who they are. What about parents who maybe are experiencing some mental health problems. Maybe they are living with anxiety or depression, or they may have bipolar disorder, or other things where they may feel that they're justified in their parenting. So it's important for them to seek professional help and to be able to talk to a mental health professional. So what do we do with that? What do we do if one parent is grounded, or is, they're okay, they're mentally, their mental health is stable and well, and another parent is not? Because that's very common. Like, we know from mental health problems, based on their statistics here, that like 1 in 5 adults experiences a mental health problem in any given year. Well, and that's usually more with the anxiety disorders because they're much more prevalent. But so it's very common. It's not like it's not uncommon to find.
More than 50% of the cases I see, kids have less issues as compared to parents.
You think the parents have more issues, and so the children are acting out?
Right, because their action is making him mentally unstable. Their action,
The parents' actions is making is affecting the children.
treat each other, it is affecting this guy, and that's why he's a position of the mind, or he's getting like behavior issues.
Yes, and we see that. We know that with, we know that here we're experiencing more, well, actually these three. These tend to be the most, children of these parents tend to be the most balanced, solid in their sense of like their self-esteem and their confidence. Here that we're going to see more mental health problems because of the message that's being given. So then what do? Sometimes we don't have access to the parents. So that's what I'm going to say. Like, everybody here, you're at that point where you're just like, wait, even if I may be living with a mental health problem, I'm aware and insightful enough to know that I can go somewhere and get help, and I can go somewhere and learn something, right? But what about parents who maybe, they don't have that realization or that awareness? What can we do?
I think that the other partner has a major responsibility in this case. If someone has some issues, that person may or may not recognize those issues, right?
That person may or may not?
May not recognize those issues, so that they are really going through something or they have issues. So maybe the other partner, if there's available, that person has a higher and more responsibility to make sure that he's able to kind of restored and all that.
So you're saying if one parent might be having some extreme mental health problems, then the responsibility kind of falls a little bit on the other parent to be able to support or to be able to try to get them to get some professional help. Yes, and it doesn't always happen. And yes, and sometimes the other partner is just, whether it's because of stigma or cultural, I mean, we can go on a whole other talk about mental health. Maybe we can look at, one of the things we've been teaching right now, even like with the grant through ICNA Relief, is mental health first aid. So that's something that maybe we can explore down the line. But at the end of the day, like our relationship with our child, I know there's another person or there's other people who are involved in it, but we have a relationship with our child, and that's what we have control over. And we can attempt to get other caregivers who are, involved in the child's life on board on the same page, but I don't want to undermine what our impact is. Because a lot of times we think that we have to be like the perfect parent, but the research will show you have to be good enough. And so it's like, if I can be good enough and support my spouse, so I have another responsibility towards my spouse in terms of supporting their mental health, and it gets a little bit more complicated if they're not on board with it, with getting the help that they need. It doesn't mean that I give up, but not having that get in the way of my relationship with my child.
But at the end of the day, it's a family dynamic. It's not like you are a perfect mother or a father and your family would be best. Because it impacts, because it's a family. If your spouse is not going through issues, and so from that point of view, I understand that the other person may not be even thinking that they have this issue or something. So of course it's a kind of tough situation, but still, being one of those parents even be very balanced and everything, but if other is not, then the whole entire family dynamics is not going to work that well.
So we're looking Ideal, yes. Ideally, we want both parents to be mentally healthy, mentally stable, on the same page. That's in a perfect world, that's where we're going to be. It is a family dynamic. Sometimes within certain families, the relationship with the children and the children's behavior, if they start acting out, that's a reason to get the other parent to seek help. But that's not the case in every situation. So it becomes very case by case, and a lot of times the burden is going to fall on the partner who is more, because they can both still have, challenges, but the one who's more aware, more insightful, more adamant about, I want my children to have like a positive, healthy environment. And it's okay if we're not always on the same page. That's what I'm trying to say, is that like it's really going to depend, but your passion and your commitment to being the best parent that you can be and creating and cultivating an environment in the home for your children, that's going to drive a lot of things, inshallah, and dua is always like a big part of it too. Yes. Yes, please do.
One of the partner is unstable, the other is stable. The more chances are that the one who is stable after a few years he will be unstable. So the one who is unstable should seek treatment, whether it is counseling or medication, whatever it is, because we are overcompensating with the other one who is stable. But the mental illness, if you don't treat, can be lifelong.
No, absolutely. So the concept is, if one partner is emotionally or mentally unstable, and then we put a lot of burden on the other one, that's gonna take a toll on the other partner. And then, so yes, in an ideal situation, absolutely, anybody. We don't have to be severely mentally unstable. Like anybody, like mental health professionals should be accessed, should be utilized. It's not just, a person has, a diagnosis of some sort and that's why they're going there. No, even everyday challenges and everyday struggles impact us, and over time, it really wears us down. So can we have someone that we can go to and talk to and be able to sort of just, put things in perspective, benefit from them, knowing that, it's so common these days. And alhamdulillah, there's organizations that provide that resource. The organization I'm with being one of them, ICNA Relief at Crescent Counseling Center, we have teams of mental health professionals who, are able to provide counseling services. So yes, and the more that we can change the culture that we talk about mental health and it becomes okay and it's very normal, the more likely individuals who are experiencing and living with mental health problems will be to access resources. So it's family, and then it's sort of like extended family, and then it's community, and then it's society, and it's sort of, the impact is all there. And so when I'm saying it starts with us and we want to make sure that like we're the one who's committed to that, it's not to put the entire burden on us, but it's also to know that we can't be responsible for everything that's going on. Like everybody's going to have, everyone takes responsibility for their piece of it, and we do what we can to support. Because one thing I've learned and one thing I've seen through just years of practice, you cannot make, like even like legally, you cannot make someone go get help. Like they can't, unless a person is suicidal or unless they are going to harm somebody else with clear intent and there's an identified victim and there's a means and everything, we can't force. Like, and even they'll argue and say even that force, like if you're going to do a forced hospitalization, it's not always, there comes with its own set of trauma. So, and then of course child abuse, that's, reportable, people will get involved. Other than that, the best thing that we can do is just support and get people, shift the culture a little bit, talk to them and try to get the help that we can. Thank you for, these are like really awesome points. Yes. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so the stigma is being reduced, the culture is shifting, organizations are available, resources are out there, and there's a lot of talk around it, and that's changing the culture. Yes.
Let me pass the mic around.
Okay.
So it will be, excuse me. Yeah, Jazakallah. Okay, and I think that Alhamdulillah, we're very fortunate being in this environment and in the United States where all of this is being encouraged and talked about, and the fact that there is also a larger and a higher level of education amongst the parents, it is making things a lot easier on them. I think education has a lot to do with it. We have to teach the parents and make sure that they are taught, whether it's an education for degree, certificate, and or sessions like these where they're well-rounded as individuals. I think that makes them well-rounded parents and balanced. And they will be more prone to be where we want them to be as authoritative parents.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Does anyone have like a scenario or like maybe just an issue that maybe they've heard someone dealing with their kids, or they're kind of like, oh my goodness, I don't know how I would react in that situation, or what would you do? So we'll get the mic so that I don't have to repeat the whole thing.
I always used to hear that he has anger issues. The husband has anger issues, and later on he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder means extremes of mood, either very high or low. So that family, they seek help, but he was most of the time not taking medication. Home was chaotic. And what happened to the kids is that they don't want to live at this environment. And they have 3 kids, 4 kids. So, and they are all like 14, 15 years, 16 years of age. So the home environment is very important, because if the father is angry all the time, is not taking treatment, at one point the mother also become rebellious. She also have tried to have her own voice. So this is a very conflicting environment where you cannot do anything without getting angry. Without getting anger. Like
Okay.
Mother is now totally defiant. She does not resent, and the father has to be angry to get things done.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the kids have learned. So if you will talk to their kids, they would be easily upset. The moment if you say something which is not according to what they wish, or you don't do what they want to, so this is a very sad scenario, because these kids have a high risk of either ending up their life because they are totally confused.
Yes.
And the family does not want to seek help from the mental illness point of view. It can be treatable, but that is a very, very sad scenario, which is like, as a psychiatrist, I feel sorry for that family, that being the community help is available. I am at St. Gabriel Mosque of Walnut Masjid.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody has any mental health issues, they can contact Sajjad over there. So that is, or Asad is there, and he usually calls me on Friday. That number of counseling is there. But please, I would say, I have seen people change, even whatever their diagnosis was, personality disorder or mental illness. Believe me, with counseling and with what you are doing, people have changed. So please seek help. Don't think that anger is a normal thing. You might have a bipolar disorder.
I mean, mashallah, jazakallah khair for sharing and for being of service to the community. Like, I think that's a wonderful resource. And because of that, I think that's part of the big reason that we're able to shift, right? I mean, to be able to have access to a psychiatrist at a masjid, that's huge. And so we're very appreciative for that. Yes.
Yeah, on a lighter note, I just wanted to ask, like, even being an authoritative parent, and once children turn, like my son turned 11, they try to test more, they try to
Absolutely.
start being more rebellious. When can you go to the authoritarian when you need to? Because sometimes they don't want to do what they're supposed to do. They're trying to like test and see, like, okay, like I've been, like they used to like listen and do, they know but now I'm like, who's that? And what's going on? And what,
So
like
puberty is
Yeah,
what's
like
going
what?
on.
Yeah, like what? Like when do you like say, you know what? Like, yeah, we talked everything, but you know what? This is what you need to do.
So, and that's a really good point, because it's like, okay, so we're here, we're trying to do the whole give and take. There's a bi-directional communication where they're involved, we're involved, and sometimes it's like, okay, it's not happening. So, so self-disclosure. I was raised, my parents were pretty, they were probably pretty here, sometimes here, but it's like when it was, okay, so my father would always, like growing up, it was more of, if we say no and you want to do something, like you can question it. You can ask why, because, he's coming from a scientist background. It's very hypothesis, and we're going to test it and come to a conclusion and all of that. There were a few, and for the most part, it was like, okay, yeah, like I, would kind of argue. My brother didn't have that experience. I think with my brother, they might have been more here. I was the second child and the girl, so I think I got more of this. So my brother would look at me and he's just like, Deana, be quiet, you're being disrespectful. And I'm like, no, it's fine. Like Daddy said, I can, ask questions, and I can give and take, and we can negotiate, and we can argue and reason and use logic, and I can build a case. There were a few times growing up where, no, I'm like, Daddy, why? He's like, there's no why, because I said so. You can count them, but those were like few times, and it was, I knew I wasn't happy, but I was like, I need to be quiet. Like I can't argue. It happens so rare that when it does happen, there must be a bigger reason, and it's just more of a like, this is not the time. So we had a little bit of that. For the most part, though, and I see it now, like, my nephew, I think he's probably like the same age, but it's more of, just, okay, rolling eyes, or even though just very little bit more, it's part of their age group where it's like, well, the rules, okay, fine, whatever, like we'll do it, and you feel kind of like, well, no, but here's why, and you want to like explain it so they don't feel like they're just being singled out. But sometimes it's that validating piece. Like, I get it, you're irritated, I get it, you're not happy, and this is how it is. And being able to, when they're not so charged, have those times of talking about why we have these rules. Why don't we allow for 1, 2, 3? Why are we asking you to do A, B, C? And we actually have a discussion, healthy discussion. And they might not always be convinced. And we can validate. The biggest tool and resource you can have as a parent is to validate your children's emotions. Like, if you can expand on, and what does validate their emotions mean? They're sad. If we can help them name what they're feeling, especially from a younger age, then their like emotional vocabulary is very broad, and they're able to tap into that. Because you can be like, well, I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm happy. Those are basic, right? Okay, what about like, I'm a little disturbed, I'm angry, I'm furious, I'm ecstatic, and you just have this bigger, colorful, it's like the crayon box. You have like the 8-pack, the basic like colors, and then you have the like 124, and you're just like, oh, there's like periwinkle blue. So if we can do that with their emotions, where they can start labeling it, they realize that we're paying attention, right? They have a wider vocabulary, and we're acknowledging what it is they're feeling. So yeah, if I can help them acknowledge what they're feeling, yeah, I get it, you're upset right now. Okay. And this is still what we have to do, and I get it, you want to take your time off, and life's not fair. I know, it's not always fair. It's a tough lesson to teach them, but life isn't, it's not always fair. And sometimes we have to do things and we don't agree with, and we don't get it, and it's just how it is. And then we can talk about it like if we do like family meetings, or if we have time when they're not so charged, because the last thing you want to do with anybody, including a partner or yourself even, is like get involved in a discussion when you're emotionally charged. It's not going to be very fruitful. I think, okay, so.
I can just talk about it. No, but along those lines, because I also have 2 boys that are in that prepubescent stage and whatnot, and of course they want to start claiming their ground.
Yes.
And one thing I've noticed is, well, with us being busy parents and whatnot, is time management. And at the same time, it's like we need to get our things done, but of course they're trying to flex their muscles as well. So what we do is just give them options. It's like this or this. And of course they want to be heard, and I do give them the opportunity to say no if you can justify why. And at the end of the day, it's ours, you know. But the fact that they want to be heard, okay, well, explain why are you? Because you can't just say no and not have anything to go off of it. Because that's where they're just trying to stand the ground, just to be
Yes.
rebellious and whatnot. But
And so part of it is also checking in with ourselves, because sometimes what they're asking for is very typical and very normal, and it's just not comfortable for us. But if we kind of put ourselves in like where they're coming from, as long as there's like a certain parameter, so what's our reason for being adamant about the no? Like we want to own that part. Is it just more of, I'm not comfortable with what this could mean? And if we can get them, if through the discussions we can get to where we can create win-win solutions and compromises. So it's like, okay, they want to do this. I want them to be able to experience it, but I want to also have some control over who's going to be there. So maybe we're going to have a party, but maybe we'll have it at my house so that my eyes are, you know, people are over here and I can kind of enforce what's happening and I can keep an eye on it, but they can still be with their friends. So it becomes more of let's come up with creative solutions with them. Yes.
Yeah, so a quick question. I've heard and read different things on like how you discipline your kids,
Mhm.
and usually a topic of like, you know, raising your voice or like creating that like charged atmosphere. Is there ever like a case that you should yell, or is it that you should never like raise your voice or yell at your kids, but you should just talk in like a calm manner? So like how do you approach that, or is it just like a different style in how you do things?
So have any of you ever experienced somebody like yelling but they were too calm and you were like sometimes, and it like it's almost scares you because you're just like, wait a minute, and they're really angry but they're super so we want to be composed, and part of it's going to depend on the style. So if the person is just in general they don't yell, personally, I think when people yell, other people just shut down. Just nervous system gets too overstimulated and it's just like shut down, I can't hear anything, and all I hear is the tone of voice as opposed to like the words that are being said. So part of it's going to be the person's style. A part of it is also going to be like whatever they're like what they're used to and what they found works. In general, there can be a firm tone. Like I can still be very I can be very firm in my tone and clear that this is a boundary without yelling. So it's not helpful to like yell and lose it, because if I look like I'm an emotional wreck in front of my children, then they're gonna like look and just be like, okay, mom just like, I don't know what happened, right? But if we're talking and it's clear, I'm still composed, I'm in control of what's being said, I'm not and I also wanna make sure that my reaction is not out of line with like what it needs to be, because sometimes the kids are like, I just said like no, and you know, and sometimes for us it's more of, well, I had 50 million things like pile up and the kid came at that one time and then basically the floodgates opened on it's not fair to them either. So it's how do we, you know, keep track of our own, like what's happening with us, and are there going to be times that we're going to mess up? Absolutely. We're human. If we didn't, then we should worry.
Hi, quick question. So let's say you have one kid, and then, you know, I think we agree that the authoritative style is probably the most effective and well-rounded, right? But with that one kid, are there situations when, you know, like you mentioned in your case, your parents were sometimes authoritarian. Are there benefits or value to kind of changing it based on a case-by-case basis with that individual kid? And the second part of that question is, what if you have different kids, and are there different, one of those styles, is there any effectiveness with different kids to be a certain way? So, you